Do you respect the bad guy?
You can go to the men's room in the Cow Palace. You're hurting me!
Some dumb hick from Mud Lick.
I don't give a damn who you are!
This is a con job. Pure and simple is exactly what it is.
Me, Gene! Who made this coat?
Versace. It's Italian. $4,000.
Well, brother! Finally, The Rock has come back!
Welcome back, folks, to the first episode of the Markamania podcast. Now, we've done a few programs on this channel before, but this is the first episode of the flagship podcast. So welcome, everyone. It's going to be a laid-back environment here. Have no fear. We are going to be talking about, of course, the biggest wrestling event in the history of live wrestling events, AEW's All In. Perhaps you've heard of it. And we're going to get into it immediately. Now, I have all of my notes of about 5 pages of notes from this event. I didn't give it star ratings when I was first putting the whole thing together, but I will give them at the end of each match. So we'll get my original thoughts here, and I'll have to come up with my star ratings somewhat on the fly. So as we're talking about each match, hit me up in the comments. Let me know what you thought of the match. We'll get your thoughts put out there on the screen. If you have any questions, get those in there as well. Look forward to hearing from you. What up? We got someone in the chat already. Justin Herbert, my good friend, and hopefully a potential co-host or at least a guest spot on this very show. Justin Herbert, longtime listener, dear friend, frequent chatter. Welcome, welcome. All right, Justin, so we're going to start with, let me turn this down just a tad. We are going to start with the first match of the AEW All In pay-per-view. It was CM Punk versus Samoa Joe for the Real World's Championship. Now, let me know in the chat, folks, if you watched this or not. It's going to be full-on spoiler time, all right? I'm not going to go over this thing beat by beat. There are places you can get that. I would suggest Wrestling with Regret. He put together quite a good review, and I honestly think he liked a lot of these matches more than I did. So if you're a big fan, definitely go check him out. So the thing with the CM Punk Samoa Joe match was it's a bit of a nostalgia play, right? It watched a lot of this stuff back in the day. If you did with Ring of Honor, you know what he was into. And so Punk and Joe, they got off to a slow start. It was a side headlock bit turned into an outside of the ring brawl. My first note here was that Jim Ross, the legendary JR, was struggling a bit on commentary. All right, gotcha. Oh, sweet, Justin. Don't worry. I will. I'll let you know. So we'll get through this quick. Curveball. Did you know Samoa Joe plays the clown in Twisted Metal? I did not. I haven't watched that yet. Justin, is Twisted Metal, is that worth a watch? I think that's on Peacock. I might watch it. Now I know that Samoa Joe and the new Captain America are in this thing. I think I'm going to go ahead and watch it. But this whole thing, quickly, the Joe Punk match, Joe dominated the match. Punk got some color. They did the whole muscle buster thing, which is, if you don't know, that's Samoa Joe's finisher. He puts you on the turnbuckle, gets you up here. Punk gets out of it. He gets some momentum. It was pretty funny. He does actually, you know what? Let me pull this up on Twitter. I can just show you this spot. I don't have to narrate it for you because he does a very interesting, it's like a John Cena into a Hulkamania thing. Why is this not popping up? Hold, please. No, it's so we have this CM Punk does this funny thing. I love when he does these. There we go. We are getting here. About to present to all of you. Forgive me. First time in a minute riding solo. We usually have a producer on hand. Here we go. All right, so you can see him and not necessarily me, and that's totally fine. Check it out here. We are going to mute it, but as it replays, it'll go back to the star here. He does the John Cena sort of, I forget what this sort of backdrop is called, and he even raises his hand up like he's going to do the "You Can't See Me." And then it turns into a Hulk Hogan doing the ears. And what you won't see after this, he's going to do the freaking leg drop here. I do love this bit. My favorite part about CM Punk right now is that he's a half heel, half face. Like, people hate him as much as some people love him. And what you don't see after that is that then Samoa Joe does his own version of hulking up. And this was at Wembley, so this was Sunday at 1 p.m. They had their big pay-per-view, all in Wembley Stadium, and it was a decent match. Punk then turns the second muscle buster into the Pepsi plunge. So if you remember that, it's basically a pedigree from the top rope, and that looked kind of sloppy. But that was the win, as you expect it. I think everyone expected Punk to retain here. What I expect they'll do, not breaking any news on this one either, is that at some point they'll build to Punk and MJF fighting now that they have two versions of the championship. You know, Justin, you mentioned this earlier. We were having a chat, and you were talking about how the WWE needs to do an invasion angle, and we will talk WWE. Don't worry, I will get there. But you speak of that type of angle, and it's just kind of funny right now on AEW. They have the two different, champions. It's basically an old WWE angle. You know, the Punk came back. When they did it for the WWE, it was, he ran off with the championship. This time he was injured. So I think it's an interesting way that they sort of naturally gave their Saturday show a belt, because they're clearly separating the presentation and the style and all of that stuff for the second show. So I think that whole part is pretty interesting. If I'm giving this a 5 out of a 5-star rating, honestly, I'd give that like 3 out of 5. It was just solid. There was nothing special about it. To me, it was just a big nostalgia play on a lot of it, just playing back to old Ring of Honor stuff. But I didn't hate it. I thought it was a good way to set it up. We'll go through the rest of this stuff a little more quickly, just because I know we have some WWE viewers, but I will, Justin, I will hit the highlights here, and we'll probably come back and talk about some of this stuff later. But quickly, the trios match between Bullet Club Gold and Takeshita, or as Jim Cornette says, Take a Shit, versus Kenny Omega, Hangman, and Kota Ibushi. I predicted that Kenny would win. Sorry, I did not mention on the first one what my prediction was. That, to keep me honest and to kind of keep track of what we're doing, I like to let you know what I predicted. And Justin, if you're into it, I still have all of my notes from SummerSlam. So what I'd like to do is, after we're done talking about what's new in the WWEs, I'll go back and read over my SummerSlam notes, kind of compare. See a lot of people comparing this event to WrestleMania, which I understand, but SummerSlam is the WWE's big summer event, so I think it's fair to just do that, compare it to the most recent pay-per-view. But that's how I plan on doing the rest of this. So bear with me if you don't mind, Justin, as we go through the AEW stuff. I'll go quickly through the parts that are boring, and I will just we'll highlight the good parts, because as you mentioned, it might be worth watching again. This was my second, I almost said first, this was my second AEW pay-per-view ever. The first one I did not enjoy. This one I did, although I mean it wasn't a home run for me, and we'll get into it as we go on, but there were definitely some high spots. I didn't feel like I wasted my time watching that 4-hour pay-per-view, although admittedly, I'm always working on something in the background. Kenny Omega is a dog. You know what? I listened to Jim Cornette's podcast before I started watching AEW, and if you just hear him tell it, this dude has no value to the sport, and I just don't agree with that. I think he is pretty good. But Michael, what's up, man? Thank you. I know absolutely nothing about wrestling, so I'm here to boost impressions with the salute. Thanks, Michael. I appreciate you, man. Coach Michael is a G, and hopefully we'll be chatting again soon on a Bite Size Sports podcast. But go ahead and check that out. You guys might be watching us on Facebook on Bite Size Sports. Go ahead and please give that a subscribe as well. I am actually streaming to the Markamania YouTube channel. I don't want to clutter our Bite Size Sports stuff too much. So we've got our own little channel over here, but powered by Bite Size Sports. So definitely go check it out. The NFL Network is getting queued up podcasts for every team. Well, we're working on our way to every team, but we've got quite a few started up. All right, so back to this trios match. Very quickly, I just want to say another Jim Ross bit, and we're going to talk maybe a little bit about the announcers, a lot about JR while he was in there. So what they did for this, JR, there's a 3-man commentary booth, and you had Nigel and Excalibur the whole time, and then Jim Ross started it, and after a few matches, Tony Schiavone tagged in for Jim Ross, and then after a few more matches, there's an incredibly long and awkward production pause, which, hey, listen, those of you that know that I do that exact gig for Carnage Media, so I'm not here to throw shade. It can be very difficult sometimes to just switch someone out of a chair. So then they switched to Taz, and it was nice to have that flavor, but unfortunately, you just mentioned Justin, JR, he's getting old. He just needs to retire. He is the GOAT. I agree with all of that. It down to the he needs to retire part, because it was struggling. At one point, Cranky JR, my biggest note from the Bullet Club Gold triple threat or trios match was JR saying, "Why is everything gold?" He's just getting, because it's Bullet Club Gold, and Kenny Omega's partners called the Golden something. I think at one point as tag teams, they were called the Golden Lovers. And so JR was just getting irritated that everybody had gold in their name. And he's old school, man. He worked for guys that would have in the locker room, it would say you can't wear the same color tights if you're fighting each other, because it would be too confusing to the local audience. So, he's freaking old school. He doesn't get half the shit that goes on in AEW, and he's not afraid to say it. There's going to be another point I don't know if it's this match. I think it's later on in a different match where he says, "Who's legal? Does it matter?" Or it might be Schiavone. They both have the same problem where they're old school and they're doing their best to try to keep up with it. But when AEW does their tag match stuff, they don't really pay attention to those old school rules, and they just have people coming in and out like it's a scene from an Avengers movie. And these old school commentators just can't quite keep up with it. And their confusion, I mean, it's kind of funny. It makes for a good laugh. Shout out to Botchamania. Give them a watch on YouTube if you're ever looking for something to get you through a lunch break. Yeah, JR is really, you're right, Justin. He does not care. He don't give an F at this point. Oh, so the whole thing ends with a roll up. Takeshita gets the win over Kenny Omega. I was very shocked. Spoiler alert, I'm going to be shocked by a few of the outcomes here. Some people that I was led to believe, again, based on some of my podcast choices. I I never thought some of these people would put the other folks over. So this was interesting to see. I don't love the story. I'm not a big Don Callis fan with all of this with the Kenny stuff. So match wise, I thought it was decent. I'm just gonna give it 2.5 out of 5 stars. Let's just right down the middle, guys. I'm not a pro at these star ratings yet, so feel free to just eviscerate me in the comments. I might earn it. I don't know. We'll keep it rolling though. FTR versus the Young Bucks tag titles. Now, if you're a straight WWE guy and maybe don't know, I have a friend that's a WWE guy, only watches no AEW and didn't know who FTR was. And when I said, well, it's the Revival, still didn't know who that was, which is fair because if you grew up watching it like I did and checked out at a certain point like I did, you would have missed these guys, and they weren't treated super well in the WWE, and then went on to do some things in the indies in AEW, and at one point had almost every tag belt that wasn't in the WWE. And so they're known as one of, if not the greatest modern tag teams, and so are the Young Bucks. And that was the whole thing. It was the best of 3 for the title, FTR versus the Young Bucks. And, the Young Bucks are executive vice presidents in this company. So a lot of people thought that they would be winning in front of the record crowd. Again, cough, Jim Cornette, Brian Last, cough, definitely called these guys out and said that there was no way the Young Bucks would put them over. And then Cash Wheeler of FTR had that arrest go out, an arrest warrant, because someone accused him of waving his gun on the highway, which we'll see about all of that. But people then thought at that point, oh, well, there's no way they're going to keep the belts on these guys, which is this is the interesting part of modern wrestling. When I was a kid, kayfabe was still alive for the most part. You didn't have to think about this. It's like a weird inception thing that happens. Now we know about the reality, and so the way you keep your suspension of disbelief is you try to basically book it yourself. Like, oh, well, what will happen now that we know this guy got arrested? It's like, now that we know this, and this is not Cash Wheeler, but now that we know this wrestler, oh, listen, he got a DUI in the news. Oh, how are they going to take the belt off him or whatever? And so I think this was a good bit of booking to have FTR actually win. The match was amazing. I'm not gonna do the whole beat for beat thing because they just couldn't do it any justice. But they everybody kicked out of everyone else's finisher. At one point, someone said these guys remind me of the Midnight Express, talking about FTR. I think Jim Cornette probably loved that. And the best sign of the night goes to Fear the Revolver, which of course is a joke about that FTR guy pulling a gun on somebody in the car. Uh, you know, uh, Out of 5, I feel like, I don't know, man. This is tough for me to do these 5-star ratings and stuff. So I'm just going to give it a 4.5 out of 5. So I kind of just started doing this and it feels weird to give a 5-star right away. So let me know what you guys think, those of you that watched it. But that was a phenomenal match. I look forward to going back and catching it. I had a ton of notes about that one, but we're going to skip through it and go to the Stadium Stampede, which quickly was just absolutely ridiculous. I have a video for you guys. Let me find the John Moxley of it all right? I don't even know, because I can't describe this. I'm just going to give you a trigger warning. This is pretty graphic. You're going to see some blood. There we go. Okay. Yeah, those are like kebab sticks that he's now hammering into John's head. They stick out. Yeah, he gives a little touch so that the whole thing isn't sticking out of his head like that. But yeah, he just kind of walks around. And there's a reason I'm making this whole clip play, because it's going to add to my commentary of this whole situation. Forgive me for the slow speed there, but I think it's going to help us beat any fraudulent copyright claims. So watch this. One immediate kick out after one. Okay, so fans of the sport, answer me this. Is that good? The whole I'm going to kick out at one after all that. Like, I get it is wild, right, Justin? Like, I understand the folks that enjoy that. I'm not a big fan of it. I get people that grew up on ECW and stuff might really go for that whole thing. I don't necessarily hate the spot. I think it's weird doing it in the middle of a pay-per-view like that. You're kind of, I don't know, I think of these things as like a movie sometimes, and it's kind of like having the big climax in the middle of the second act of your movie. And it's like, well, you're going to have to somehow get the energy and everything built back up for the finale. So I thought it was kind of weird to do that, but the whole having him kick out at one, having him power out of it, to me, it makes something that's actually real look fake. And the weirdest thing about wrestling in the modern era for me in some of these matches is back in the day, their whole thing was to take something that was scripted and make it look as real as possible. And then you would get to people, working with blades and to add blood to add to the authenticity of it, but they'd be using fake stuff, and now you've got people hurting themselves for real, but it looks fake as shit because then you kick out at one. Or a good example also would be Jack Perry. There was that whole argument where he wanted to use real glass for a segment, and apparently there was a fight about it. Well, in this later on, or maybe was it this very match? It was this very match. They actually used fake glass. Orange Cassidy put duct tape on backwards and put fake glass on his hand and knocked John Moxley out with the Superman punch. I think he knocked someone out with the Superman punch to get the win. But the whole thing it was just too much. And they've got 10 people fighting each other all throughout the stadium. I think if you're going to do something like that, I think it needs to be the finale. But yeah, Justin's got a good take here. At least I understand this. That's why Justin says, that's why I said WWE always top dogs. They make shit look real. And we will talk. I can't wait to talk about the things that I like from the WWE, since WrestleMania or whatever, what they've done recently. And yeah, this would be a good time because I forgot to do this at the start. And we just kind of jumped into the review. So let me finish. I'm giving out of 5. I'm giving the Stadium Stampede a 2. They did some pretty crazy spots. They had Penta fake an injury and then completely change his get up and come back out as Penta Obscura, which essentially just think Demon Finn Balor. If you don't, what I'm talking about. He just changed his face paint and got into a different get up and came back stronger, one of those gimmicks. So yeah, I'm giving that one a 2 out of 5. Justin gives it a 3 out of 5. And here we go. Before we move on, I do want to take that minute. Justin mentioned here, rest in peace to Terry Funk and Bray Wyatt. It was, absolutely horrible to hear about Bray Wyatt, especially. Terry Funk was definitely sad. But he's a guy who was close to 80, I think. Definitely someone who lived a full life. Should point out, in the opening match, CM Punk did put Samoa Joe in a spinning toe hold in honor of Terry Funk, and that was pretty cool. But the Bray Wyatt one is just tragic because only a few days ago, he was online celebrating the fact that his uncle had been saved. His uncle had just had a near-death incident, and he was really he was close to coming back. So for those who maybe weren't watching, he Bray Wyatt was back. He was doing the Uncle Howdy gimmick, which I believe it was his brother playing Uncle Howdy, and uh, he had a he had a storyline with Bobby Lashley going into WrestleMania, and it was just cut sort of out of the blue. And at the time, there was a lot of speculation that it was either because Bobby didn't want to work with him or the storyline was bad, and none of that was true. Or I mean, I won't say none of it was true, but that wasn't the reason. He had a health issue, and what we've come to find out now, what's been released was that he had a heart condition that apparently a case of COVID made worse. And yeah, so he died of some sort of heart condition at 36, and that's just very, very tragic. Yeah, as Justin says, he's with his great friend Luke Harper now, Brody Lee, as some know him. And yeah, it's a real shame. It always is. But this guy was 36 years old. He had 2 kids. He was married. And every single person who had anything to say about him only said positive things. I didn't hear a single person, uh, and not that, of course, people say nice things about you when you're gone, but I mean, with this guy, everybody had very specific, detailed stories about how kind he was. So, just a big loss. I The one thing I guess that always happens is people will appreciate him now way more than they did. Um, you know, Even I will admit I didn't love the most recent bit of creative that he had done. And I don't, you never know how much of that, especially with the WWE, you never know how much of that is the wrestler, how much of it is Triple H, how much of it is Vince McMahon. I think most of the time we all assume when it's bad, it's Vince McMahon. But yeah, he was a huge talent. He will be appreciated. People are already saying things like, well, you know, hopefully they do something with Bo Dallas, push his brother and maybe even bring the Uncle Howdy character back. So I personally would love to see them push Bo Dallas, but only in a way that he sees fit. And honestly, I'd rather them just leave the Fiend Uncle Howdy stuff alone just because it was Bray's. And I think we need to let that simmer for a while before we do something like that. But that's just my personal opinion. Let me know what you guys think. Would you like to see some sort of storyline that would be reminiscent? Bo Dallas could use some of the previous lore his brother created with the Wyatt family or with the Fiend. To me, some of the most interesting and creative uh, WWE stories that we had in some time. It was reminiscent of Kane and Undertaker, Mankind, sort of all of that stuff. When he did that crazy Bayou cult leader stuff, I wasn't actively watching back then. And I have since had a chance to go back and watch clips, videos people have put together, and have enjoyed it from afar. But he did some amazing work. And yeah, at least now it will forever be shown in a bright light. So whatever silver lining that's worth. Chainsaw Charlie, aka Terry Funk the Goat. Yeah, man. And like you said, Bray was always on people's good side. So yeah, a couple of legends. Rest in peace to them both. Going back here to the notes that I have. The next one will be very quick. It was a 4-way women's title match. I thought they did a very good job with the storytelling. You had 2 heels here in Tony Storm and Saraya that were part of the same faction, and then you had the champion Ishida and the favorite Dr. Britt Baker. Which, say what you want to say about Adam Cole and Britt Baker, but they were both in title matches at the biggest event in wrestling history. So, I mean, that's pretty cool for them. Congrats to them for that. But he kind of knew where this one was going because Saraya is from England and had recovered from that crazy neck injury. So you kind of felt like this was the perfect opportunity for a hometown pop. They're not in England every year. Maybe they will be going forward, but it's kind of one of those that felt like it was pretty easy to call. They did the classic thing early on. The heels are working together, but then it very quickly broke apart. And at that moment, I realized, oh, they're gaining some time back. They're hustling this up for the later matches, because this match ended very quickly. It was the story you would expect, but a great moment with Saraya winning. Her whole family was there. They were part of the match. My weird critique was early on. The heel Tony Storm has Soraya's mother in the crowd holding one of the other wrestlers, and she comes in, elbows the mother, and at that point, all bets are off. They're no longer friends, but yet they continue to book these accidental incidents that, for instance, they have Tony Storm trip over someone and land on top of Saraya, and the referee counts it as a pin. And so it's like they continue to have these inciting incidents, but the top had already blown. Um, so it didn't make sense. And hold on to that, because when we get to our main event, we talk about some other friends in a cracking relationship. You might see that be a recurring theme. So Sarai ends up getting the win, and I'll give that one a 3 out of 5. Honestly, it was predictable, but it was quick, and I don't know that it was meant to be quick. I think if they had 20 minutes to do this match, and they did the story that they intended, but didn't have to rush through it so much, I think that it would have been potentially even better. But it got the job done. Big home crowd pop. Give me a 3 out of 5. The next one, now some old nostalgic fans might love this. Now, Justin, let me ask you and the others of you in the chat, are you fans of Sting? Because if you are, you're going to love this next match. It was a coffin match, which was Swerve and Christian Cage versus Darby and Sting. What was really cool about this one was, although Darby he does like a short film I don't know if he does it for TV entrances, but for pay-per-views, he always has this little short film that plays. And he had one with Sting this time. And at the end of it, half of his face paint was the regular, it's Sting from the 90s that he still uses to this day now that he's in AEW, but the other half was the Joker Sting face paint. And if you're not familiar with that storyline, it was a pretty ridiculous one. I think it was kind of fun back when TNA had Kurt Angle. I think this was around the Main Event Mafia timeline. It might have been. I believe it was actually after all of that, but Sting goes crazy. He gets disrespected. He goes Joker Sting, and he really overacts and has a lot more character to him. It's almost the antithesis of his 1990s run where he was the Crow. And so he came out in this fight with the Joker Sting face paint as well. I think that had to be very cool for the live viewers. Again, I know that I popped for it, even though I'm a person who believes that this 62-year-old man should not be in the ring anymore, let alone leg dropping people through tables, which he did. He continues to be a big spot guy. It's nuts the way at his age, and they do a pretty good job of protecting him for the most part. He did a leg drop off the apron onto a table. That's how he put the guy through the table. So it's not as insane as going off the top rope. So it still looks pretty crazy, but it seems relatively safe. So, obviously Sting and Darby Allin are not going to lose a coffin match. So they won. Sue me, but I'm giving that one another 3 out of 5. Then we had Jericho versus Ospreay. I had predicted that Ospreay would win. That's another hometown situation. This one killed me though, because to start the match, those of you who probably don't know this, Chris Jericho has a band. It's called Fozzy. Yes, I do love me some Y2J. I miss him sometimes. Although I'm not as sour on AEW Jericho as some folks are, but Jericho's band Fozzy performed his entrance music and he sang it. But before he did his own rendition of the famous Freddie Mercury, "Ayo, ayo," where he does that. Some of you'll know the clip, or if not, look it up. Where Freddie Mercury gets the crowd to repeat after me, sort of thing, and he's just doing his vocal warm ups. And so Jericho starts doing that, which for me personally, look, here's a little backstory, a little inside baseball for all you cats and kittens out there. I grew up a huge Queen fan. The first CD that I purchased when I had my own car was Queen's Greatest Hits. It was a 40 track, like 4 disc set bad boy. It was massive. When it was time to do communications courses in high school and I had to pick an informative speech, the very first speech I ever did was an informative speech on the history of the band Queen. All right. I love Queen about as much as all 81,000 of those Brits in that stadium. And I found it just to be so goddamn offensive to have Chris Jericho, of all people, mimicking Freddie Mercury in what is kind of hallowed ground for stuff like that. You know what I mean? He's a British dude, did that, you're doing it in Wembley. Come on. And technically, because it was this massive wrestling crowd, now Fozzy has performed in front of more people than like Queen or the Beatles or something like that in Wembley. I don't know if that last part is true. I heard that one secondhand, but it chapped my ass a little bit that he did that. But at least he recognized that he was the heel. So this one was interesting. Going into the story, Jericho had been turned on by Don Callis, and Osprey was the hired gun. He's a Japan guy who's pretty good. He's had some great bouts with Kenny Omega, for those of you who don't know. And so Jericho was set up as the good guy, but when he gets there, he's in England fighting a British guy. He's not gonna be the good guy. So sort of like Justin, if you remember the uh, Hulk Hollywood Hogan, forgive me, versus the Rock fight, where they kind of realized that the crowd wanted Hogan to win, and and they kind of switched roles. Rock started fighting as a heel, even though leading in he had been the good guy. Jericho kind of did that, he and then he did sort of act as a heel again after the match. So maybe that was always part of it. It's really always tough to tell with that guy's booking. I honestly think he just did this short-term face turn so he could do the whole I'm going to have my band perform for me as I walk into Fozzy. And might I add, you know, to whatever point Sebastian Bach made back in the day, they definitely had his vocals piped into the stadium as well. He was singing. He definitely was singing at times because you could tell the times when he wasn't singing, and and his vocals were still going throughout the stadium. So the match, give it 2.5 out of 5. It wasn't bad. Osprey, I think, carried it pretty well. Jericho did this. He does this weird thing now where he blades his chest after a few chops. So he'll go down to his knees and very clearly pull a blade out of his wristband and then cut himself a couple times. And then later he'll rub it and lick it. And you can very clearly see like the blade slashes in his chest. It doesn't look great. So as Justin said here, sometimes Jericho is a clown, but 2.5 stars out of 5. I didn't love it. At that point, Nigel comes out to announce 81,035 in attendance. That is a record. Congrats to them for that. I mean, it's just pretty amazing that they sold most of those tickets before they had booked any matches. Like that just goes to show you the point that was being proven here. And although I haven't watched a lot of it, I have to give it credit. I've tried to watch more segments here and there to keep up with it, so I know about as much as I do about the other stuff. But you know, they're doing well. I know the ratings aren't always great, but there's a lot to be happy about with this. But then let's see. Oh yeah, then there was this trios match which I didn't know was coming. House of Black versus the Acclaimed. You may recognize this name, Justin Herbert. Uh, Mr. Ass, Badass Billy Gunn is part of the Acclaimed. And yeah, this I'm just gonna go very quickly. This match was pretty sloppy. The chemistry wasn't great. The cool thing about the Acclaimed, their whole gimmick is that they rap some lyrics on their way out, and that was funny. They made a Prince Andrew reference that made me laugh. But no, the match wasn't great. The Acclaim did win. Uh, the finish was kind of botched because there was supposed to be a head kick that Billy Gunn had to kick out of, and he clearly didn't connect with his head. He hit the shoulder and then like lightly. It was just bad, but he had to sell it because it was the finish, and so he kicked out of it, and it was pretty sloppy. I'm giving that one a 2 out of 5. And that takes now, you know what? Mr. Ass does need to hang him up, as you said, Justin. And the whole storyline started with him hanging them up, and I actually kind of thought that was a good move. They would have been able to I thought they were moving on, letting the Acclaimed be the Acclaimed, but no, they are back to this. It was all a ruse to get Mr. Ass into Wembley, but we shall see. I mean, this should tell you all you need to know. I think at two different points in this match, the camera cut to Mercedes Moné, formerly known to the WWE universe as Sasha Banks, in the stands just watching, and the crowd popped for it both times because they were more interested in seeing this famous wrestler that might someday, be in AEW, sitting there watching than they were into this trios match. And for my opinion, like I know there's been sort of a precedent now that these pay-per-views have to be 4 hours for some reason, even though they have an hour-long pre-show. This pre-show had at the least a match featuring Jack Perry and someone else, and then the Ring of Honor Tag Team Championship match. So I didn't know why it was necessary for them to have that trios title match there. It felt like, as my dear friend Noah would say, too much ketchup on the fries. And it it then felt like, when you're sitting through a movie that's 3 hours long and you're kind of like, man, that third act is really starting to drag. That's kind of how this felt. So we got to the main event. Adam Cole versus MJF. My prediction there was, of course, MJF, as I think everyone's was. Again, I think we need the MJF versus Punk. Who's the real champion? You never beat me because I was injured. They had such a great rivalry. I think it was a year ago. However, it was a little probably like closer to 2 years ago now. But that whole thing, they did a really good job with all of it. I think they could really have fun with it again. This match, the whole thing, if you don't know the storyline, is that MJF, the usual asshole, schmarmy heel, is oh yes, Justin, we will be talking about your new favorite wrestler here soon, right after we're at our last match here, and then we will be switching gears, full throttle into the WWE talk. So I look forward to talking about Dom with you. My favorite wrestler on the AEW side right now is MJF, as I think a lot of people's are. His entrance is always pretty solid. This whole bit, they started out as enemies and they got forcibly put into the what was it, shotgun tag team. They had a gimmick where there was a tag team tournament where the partners were assigned at random. So of course the champion and the number one contender were assigned to be the tag team partners. I have no problem with that. That's a pretty old school book, I think. That feels like something out of the territory days or something, where you have to find ways you force your main guys to work together so they don't have to fight each other for another couple weeks. So I liked that, but then it started to get weird. Let's see. Justin says MJF low key never changes his role. He's real good for the wrestling business. I agree with that, and that leads right into kind of the issues that I had with this. Is their whole thing seems to be that they're turning MJF face because. Of course, everyone expected either Adam Cole or MJF to turn on each other. I actually expected them to not win the Ring of Honor tag titles. I expected them to go the old school dynamic. There's going to be tension between the two of them. One of them will inadvertently cost the other one the win for the tag team titles. And then there will be this tension going into the main event. That's what I expected. That's not what they did. So, again, credit where it's due for subverting expectation. But then they both put their tag team shirts on to start the match. They, for some reason, both had their shirts under the ring. So they both came out in their entrance music without wearing the tag team shirts and then went under the ring at the same time to put them on. Whatever. It's a little bit too much comedy in this main event for me personally. And they do some mat wrestling, some very quick combo stuff. Reminds you of like Mr. Perfect versus Bret Hart or something like that. Just a ton of quick reversals, and the crowd pops for that. They do that for a couple minutes, and then MJF offers a handshake with which Cole begrudgingly takes. And MJF does his classic heel stuff. He misses, he dodges a void, does a little Fargo strut, and then Adam Cole does his Bay thing, and then MJF offers another handshake, pokes him in the eyes, and now we're off. It starts the we're not super friends anymore, but it's actually Adam Cole throughout the whole thing that's more of a dick. He's doing more cheap shots. He pulls Max's hair several times. He rips the shirt off at one point, and it gets really colluded and muddy towards the end. At one point, Cole drops a suplex looking brain buster. He drops MJF on the ring steps, which is a pretty heinous looking thing. And that's what they presented it as, like, oh, look, he could have killed him. These guys aren't friends anymore. And so later, MJF has a chance to tombstone Cole through the announce table. He can't do it. Then Adam Cole gets that same opportunity, does do it. Later, MJF pulls his diamond ring out that he's won a ton of matches with. And then instead of hitting the cheap shot, puts them back in his trunk. And so he's clearly switching to some good guy persona. Roddy Strong comes out, tries to cheat, gives Adam Cole a chance to hit MJF with the belt. Adam won't do it. He goes to yell at Roddy, and MJF rolls him up for the 1, 2, 3. Sorry, I forgot a part where they did a double clothesline. Sorry, there was a false finish, double clothesline where they were both over each other. So it was a double pin. They both got counted to 3. So it had ended in a draw. So as a callback to the very beginning of their feud, Adam Cole asked for 5 more minutes, and MJF again said no, much like he did the first time. But then he said, this deserves more than 5 minutes. It's going to go to the end. And then they did everything else that I just said, and it ended. I'm going to give the match 4 out of 5, maybe a 3.5 if I go back and watch it. There was too much comedy, but I thought their work was good. It's the aftermath that I don't like, when Max brings the Ring of Honor tag titles, because Adam Cole is crying in the corner, and Cole throws the tag titles out. He's throwing a tantrum, kind of like a child. And then you think Cole's going to betray him and all this. They did a lot more callbacks to other bits from earlier, and then they hug it out. And I guess they're still friends. And I thought it was weird. Overall pay-per-view, though, I'll give it a 3.5 stars out of 5. And Justin, let's see what he say here. I agree. Either Kenny Omega, MJF, or Sting. I got to choose one and start watching way more. Last thing I will say about AEW before we switch over. Because Justin and those of you watching at home, thank you, by the way. We had a bigger turnout than I've expected, and we're going to go longer than I expected. I didn't think I'd get close to an hour, but I appreciate you all very much. Justin, you especially been keeping it active in the chat, but I keep up with this stuff through YouTube. I don't have time to watch 3 hours of Raw or 2 hours of SmackDown. AEW is even more difficult because they have a Wednesday show, a Friday show that admittedly a lot of people don't watch, and then a Saturday show. So that, I mean, think about that. And that didn't even count NXT on the WWE side. So NXT also has, WWE has a 2 hour Tuesday show, I believe, as well. So I go to their YouTube channels, their respective YouTube channels, and see what clips that either WWE or WWE on USA have to offer. And that's, to me, that's the most important storylines that they want us to keep up with because they're uploading those clips to YouTube. AEW does the same thing, except it's kind of better because it's all just on the AEW YouTube channel. There aren't two channels for you to sort through. And instead of telling you what happens in the headline, AEW will ask a question like, did MJF defend his title successfully against Adam Cole? Question mark. Which makes you then want to watch the 5-minute clip. Whereas the WWE will say, LA Knight beats Finn Balor. Awesome. Thank you for saving me 4 minutes. I don't have to watch it now. So anyway, shout out to the AEW marketing team and social media team. They seem to have that down a little bit better than the WWE. So Justin, if you want to get caught up quickly and then maybe have a better idea of which of the shows you want to watch, that's kind of my suggestion there, is to just start with the YouTube stuff. Then you can watch it on your own time and get caught up relatively quickly. So let's switch it up and talk a little bit about Raw. I watched just the end of it today, but speaking of those YouTube channels, I popped some clips. So I did see that we have the Judgment Day. Where did I put my notebook, by the way? Here we go. I know we saw some more Judgment Day breaking up situation. And then we've had Seth versus Shinsuke Nakamura, which is a fight that I think I'm going to like a lot. But let me know, Justin, or the rest of you folks out there in the chat, what parts of Raw you'd want to talk about. We can talk about the brand in general. This is the first episode here, so there's a lot of stuff we could go back and talk about. A lot of Cody Rhodes stuff we could talk about, and I know we will talk about him at length throughout this the future of this program. And we will talk about SmackDown as well, and then we can preview what we know about Payback, and then yeah, we'll see. I didn't expect us to go this long, so maybe I won't go beat by beat through SummerSlam. I might have to turn that into its own stream, but we can definitely go over it quickly before we tag out here. So as far as the Judgment Day, I'll start with that. If you didn't see it, Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens are going to be taking on Finn Balor and Damian Priest from the bloodline, or no, from Judgment Day, excuse me. The same group as fan favorite here, Dominic Mysterio. They'll be taking on the tag team champions in the Payback pay-per-view. But tonight's match, I believe it was Sami Zayn versus Damian Priest, who has the Money in the Bank case. That's been a whole storyline throughout when Finn Balor was going after Seth Rollins' title. And there was Damian Priest there. He was right there with the Money in the Bank coming in, looking like he was there to help, but seemed to never actually help Finn Balor. So there's been that, when will this group break? What's it gonna take? All that kind of stuff. And now you bring in this JD McDonaghy. I'm not pronouncing his name properly, but JD McDonough character that has a history with Finn Balor, and it's adding more cracks to the group. And the whole thing is here, he actually helped Damian Priest get a win over Sami Zayn. Sammy did the whole exploder suplex into the corner and he ran. He was ready to do the haluva kick, and JD McDonough grabbed his boot, distracted him long enough for Damian Priest to get that south of heaven choke slam, got the win, but then afterwards, Priest told McDonough to stay out of my business. So I don't know. That continues to be a slow build. The Judgment Day have won me over. Some of it is, as Justin said, Dom Mysterio, such a good heel. When you think about the way that guy's career, the trajectory it's been on, and how rough it was at the start when he first came out there as his dad's tag team partner, looked green as hell, was in not great shape at all, and has slowly but surely learned how to work and also learned how to work on the mic because he wasn't always great there either. But the way, for a company that books so many people poorly, they've really booked Dom well. They got him to the point where for a while he couldn't open his mouth to start a promo. They'd boo him so loudly. It was just lava levels of heat, and it's amazing. Um, I originally thought it was a bad decision to move off from Edge. I thought the heel Edge was cool. Let's do more of that. Uh, I would have been fine with them adding Balor to that, but then if you do that, then you're lowering Finn Balor's care. You're making him a mid carder, and there can only be one, I guess, main event guy, which is what they're building to with this Damian Priest thing. They're going to make him a main event level guy and break the group up, and I assume get Rhea out of there too, because while she is maybe the best manager in the business right now, she's best ringside at interacting with the commentators, interacting with the fans, doing stuff to get the referees' attention. Like, she's great at it, but she's also a women's champion and might be the best worker inside the ring on the female side. So eventually she's going to need to have the spotlight on her and not be one of these four. So I think they're going to have to break this thing up sooner than later. And maybe that's where this JD Finn thing will go. I have no idea what will happen with Dom. We know what's happening with Priest. He's going to get a push. He's going to go after someone's title. That's why he's got the money in the bank. Very rarely does the WWE punt the money in the bank thing. I think how many people have they had lose it? I think maybe only a couple, but that's usually a bad sign. If you don't win your cash in, that ain't good. But other than that, we had Becky taking on Zoe, which I know some people are bummed that they're not doing more with Becky Lynch, but I mean, they are seemingly trying to build another star up by having Zoe work with Trish Stratus and fighting against Becky Lynch. So I don't hate it, but then again, I'm not sitting here watching 3 hours of this stuff. So, I'm also not gonna pull a Corny's drive-through and run through the ratings of every show either, because that's not necessarily what it's about for me personally. But the Seth vs. Shinsuke stuff, I thought that was cool. I think it will be a good match. Those two are great workers. I like Shinsuke as a heel. They can do more with him. I love that they're letting the Japanese wrestlers just speak in Japanese to cut promos. I think it was well done having this pre-made video with him speaking Japanese with the subtitles on, because then that also, then Seth played out the fact, oh, he's not even here. He just sent a video. So then the sneak attack works that much better. So they're setting up what should be, in my opinion, a great title match for Payback. So I look forward to watching that. Let me know if you do. And now it's time to talk Smackdown. Now, there are two things in particular that I want to talk about. If you want to talk about anything else, let me know. Get it in the comments, get it in the chat. We are not going to go and run down everything. We've got the Bloodline, and we've got L.A. Knight, or Eli Drake, as some of us may remember. But two of the biggest acts in wrestling, one of them has been by design from the WWE, and one has been despite the WWE's best efforts to keep him down. And that, of course, would be LA Knight that we're talking about. He has survived some horrible booking and got himself over with catchphrase after catchphrase. He is kind of a Stone Cold Rock hybrid. I don't think there's anything wrong with that as long as too many people aren't doing it. You still have to go out there, have charisma, cut the promos, say those lines. So I think it's perfectly fine to borrow from people that came before you. And I know it's painful to admit, especially to me, but it is 2023 now. So, it's been 20 years. I think it's okay to encapsulate some of those stars in your performance. So I'm a big LA Knight fan. Uh, Looking forward to seeing that push come. I don't know how far it's going to go though, because we have this bloodline situation, which is honestly running a little long for me. Justin, let me know what you thought. I thought Cody Rhodes should have won the championship at the last WrestleMania. I almost tapped back out. I spent years without watching wrestling. So there was part of me that was like, you know what? I'm just going to go back to not watching it because you guys had the right story. It was there. You had it set up. The people wanted it. They were ready for it. And you said, no, we're going to continue to force Roman Reigns on you, just like we did in the 2010s. Remember, everybody liked it so much then when Roman Reigns was forced down our throat. But they rebounded pretty well and continued the storyline of the bloodline with the family infighting. Uh, that all worked out very well for me for a while. And then they did the whole SummerSlam situation where Jimmy turns on Jay, but he didn't do it for Roman. He did it to make sure that Jay didn't become Roman. And now, in my humble opinion, you have lost the plot. You are jumping the shark. And, it was it's a fun bit that they've had Jay quit and they've put him like on the Legends tab of, of their website. And this actually brings me back to a comment from earlier from Justin Herbert. I got to find this one from you about the Usos. I think you had said something about some rumors that they were going to AEW. There it is. I heard the Usos are supposed to go to AEW. I wonder if there's any truth to that. I would imagine that they're going to get a good contract offer. They've been the hottest bit in wrestling for some time. And I can't imagine the WWE would, at least the old WWE, would sign them just to make sure Tony Khan couldn't have them. But now that it's Endeavor or whatever the UFC conglomerate is, they might view their assets a little differently. Um, I've heard these same things about Edge. When Edge had his farewell match in Toronto, people started to say, "Oh, he's going to AEW." And then I think Edge himself had to put a Twitter video out just crediting that, which, to be honest, doesn't mean anything to me. That's exactly what you would say. The day after your last match with the WWE, you're not going to be allowed to say that you're going to AEW, even if you are. There is this little thing called a non-compete, usually is accompanied with some sort of NDA in these situations. And I want to say with the WWE, your standard non-compete is about 90 days. Case in point, Eric Young, when he not too long ago finally discussed his reasons for leaving the WWE, well, it's because his 90 days were up and he could talk about it. So you don't really know with that. Maybe there is some truth to Edge going to AEW. I mean, going back to the Usos part of it, I don't think now is the time, but competition is the best thing for both these businesses. And a year or two down the road, after this bloodline storyline fizzles, now that you've made bigger names out of yourselves, why not go get some AEW money, work new storylines? What could you imagine uh, the Usos working with FTR? I think I could enjoy an Usos Young Bucks match. I mean, it would be pretty spot heavy. Don't get me wrong; it would be overbooked to shit, but I think there'd be parts of it that I would enjoy. So I wouldn't hate that. Another question for you, the audience. What do you think they should do with the bloodline story? Should it end? I'll give you my resolution, then you can tell me if you like that or we can do something else. I think despite all this Jimmy J or J Roman stuff, I do think it needs to be Cody that takes the belt off of Roman, just because he has that whole the belt they stole from my daddy in the garden kind of thing. Like it's just such a long term lore filled story that you just don't get very often. If you The only other thing you could do, I think, would be to have Jay do it, um, because that could make sense for the family aspect, and they have had a rivalry. They've had a ton of one-on-one matches at this point, going back to the pandemic era and the 2020, which is kinda where this all started, by the way. So they've been telling this bloodline story for, what, over 3 years now? Good on them for that, for being able to do it, and it has had its moments, don't get me wrong. There have been those weeks where, from one week to the next, you'd be like, "Wow, this story's kinda ass," as they would say back in the '80s, "It's the drizzling shits." But overall, you've got the entire storyline, and when they condense it into their 1 to 2-hour playlist, you're like, "Okay, this is nice. Alright, I like this bloodline story," and I think it's running on fumes at this point, which I believe is why they did this weird stuff with Jay and have him quitting, so they can get him off TV for a while, so maybe they can do some Jimmy and Roman stuff, and because I think at this point, they're just trying to stretch to WrestleMania so they can get the belt off Roman then, at least I hope, but, let me know what you guys think. Are they gonna take the belt off of Roman at WrestleMania 40? If so, who should be the one to take it off of him? So, I think, we've talked about Raw, we've talked about SmackDown, we reviewed some of the or previewed some of the bigger, uh, events or fights from the upcoming Payback event, as well as the AEW All In review. So, I think that's as good a spot as any to call it a night, folks. I thank you so much for joining me once again and hanging out. Markamania podcast brought to you proudly by Bite Size Sports. If you are a late owl like me and you're here and you don't mind talking about other sports, go ahead and subscribe to the Bite Size Sports YouTube channel because we will be doing late night bites, our evening show, little run of the mill, not your average sports talk show, but cover a wide variety, potpourri show, if you will. But anyway, I am Kev Nevick. Follow me on Twitter at @KevNevick_, Bite Size Sports, Bite_Size Sports on Twitter. Everywhere internet is made, you can find us there. Thank you all again, one last time, for tuning in. A special shout out to our viewers of the day, Michael Allen and Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert firing off on all cylinders in the chat, brother. Appreciate you so much. Hope to have you on here side by side talking wrestling with me sometime soon. But until then, folks, I bid you adieu. We will play the outro music and we will see you next time here on Markamania.
I am the queen.
You set it up, bro!
It was all just right here in my head.
Dig it! All I have to say is...
Do you respect the bad guy?
You can go to the men's room in the cow palace.
I don't care who you are, boss! I don't give a damn who you are!
This is a con job. Pure and simple is exactly what it is.
Me, Gene? Who made this coat?
Versace. It's Italian. $4,000.
Well, brother, finally the Rock has come back.
That's a wonderful name.